Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exo-terra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exo-terra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exo-terra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exo-terra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exo-terra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. As always, Zac here with my brother from another mother, Clint. How you doing, dude?
Doing okay, man. Bouncing back from a long weekend, a good weekend, a fun weekend, but a long weekend. So I'm doing well. Doing well.
Yeah. I have bounced back from the inaugural Biology of Snakes spring break trip. This is the first time I'm teaching that class, and we went to Florida for break. This is landing right after the week after we got back. So if you all follow me on social media, I'm certain you saw some pictures that I put up of the class. But it was an exhausting week in a good way, not a bad way. And I'll talk more about that. But yeah, I'm tired, but I'm content. If that makes sense. So anyway, but back to the grind. Literally went from the fire into the inferno. Turns out when you leave for a week, the pile of stuff waiting for you just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you open the door to a whole lot of fun. And yeah, so I've been dealing with that. But anyway, let's talk about more fun stuff.
I mean, I'm familiar with that, man. Since opening the second location, there's a lot of kind of bouncing back and forth. In fact, literally, I've kind of gone back and forth each day where Mondays I'm in Henderson, Tuesdays Chandler, Wednesdays Henderson, Thursdays Chandler. And then I haven't been over there on the weekends. But Wendy and I both we're on 6 days, 7 days again. And it's not necessarily that they have to have one of us over there by any means. Ox is handling it fantastic. We have a new associate over there, Danielle. And I mean, the two of them hold it down, and then you got Drew in on the weekends, except he hasn't been here for like a week because he's out enjoying his spring break. But they're doing a great job over there. But what's odd is, I may have my laptop traveling back and forth with me to work on different computer pieces, but I never have everything at either location that I need. You know what I mean? So it's just like I'll get done and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go build this or hang this or whatever. I'm like, I don't have all my tools over here. I don't have, just little things like that slowly get better and better as we, get things added in. And then just today, so one of the major pieces that's been driving me nuts is my warehouse. The warehouse out here, we had to dismantle a whole line of shelving because I didn't have all of the footing pieces that I needed for the shelving in Henderson. And so, and the shelving here in the warehouse that I'm talking about is what we put all of our back stock on.
Yeah. And
so we've got product in boxes, which makes it hard to even see where you're at and to, be able to keep the shelves stocked appropriately. And so, and it's getting just piled with different pallets of stuff, pallets of Exo-terras, pallets of different product. And so I get the pieces in that I need, and they got in like yesterday. And so I go back there today. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go hide in the warehouse for the next couple hours. I'm going to get these shelves built, get this product up, try to clear out some pallets. And I need to make some room. And I open up the box. I'm supposed to have 2 of one type of piece and 8 of another type of piece. And they swapped those. So I couldn't build any shelves. And so I'm just ticked, kicking boxes around and still trying to make some space. Well, I just get one skid cleared off and kind of stuck up. We have big skid pallet shelving as well. Yeah. So we can put, big things up there. And in pulls a semi. And this is at 5:00. It's, we're recording right now at 6:30 my time. At 5:00 my time, a semi pulled in and unloaded 5 pallets that I had forgotten would be coming this week. And I look at him, I'm like, just put them in the parking lot. So I had to hurry up.
And take them.
Yeah, I'm like, man, and I had to figure out what to do and get everything shifted. And I got them in. They're in the building. I'm still working on that. That'll be my Wednesday and Thursday projects, I guess. But,
man.
But again, I'm not complaining. It's frustrating at times, but we got ourselves into it, and all in things are going well. The new store is doing well. They every week they either meet the expectation or beat it.
There you go. You can't ask for better than that.
No. So it's going well. And then even though it's technically a work trip, just came back from Tinley, and I always have so much fun out there. It's work/vacation. Heck, that's kind of how Anna, my floor leader, how she treats it, because she usually comes out and helps me vend, and for her it's kind of half vacation, half work as well. And so we'll talk more about that during the market update. But it's nice to, while still working, be able to just kind of blow off steam, and just get to go have fun.
Well, the snake bio trip was great.
I'd say, well, the pictures looked like it was.
Yeah. It was it wasn't stressful. I've learned that trying to do that trip and be in charge of the department and have classes and have grad students that all have needs at midterm, when the university is making all the important decisions for all the business oriented spreadsheets I have to do, the top that like 2.5 weeks before the trip was the definition of horrendous. And a lot of people think that like when you get off on the trip, that's when the work happens. It's kind of like what you were saying with Tinley. When you're in it, you're in it. So whatever the hell's going to happen is going to happen at that point.
Yeah.
So I had arguably the best group of kids, students, to go on a big extended trip for me in the past decade and a half. I mean, this trip was easy. There were lots of times where things could have gone horribly wrong, and they just didn't. And everybody had a smile on their face. And, we were battling a cold snap in Florida. If you're from Florida, your weather in March is stupid. That is my scientific declaration with my fancy degrees.
And there you have the science update.
Yes. Because it would get up to like 82, 83 degrees. But we all know with snakes, we all think, go road cruising, go out at night. And then it would be at dusk, it would drop down to like 75. And then it would get to be dark, and it would be 68, 65. And most of the Floridian snakes don't really move at 68, 65. And then it will be 60 degrees by an hour after dark. And then by midnight, it's 40. Like, what the hell? So we didn't find much at night, but we did find an awful lot of stuff during the day. And South Florida saved us. The invasives they're horrible. I am a conservation biologist. I do not approve of invasives. Blah, 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 blah. I will say one thing. Trying to catch a 4.5 foot long tegu that's faster than you, and if you get your hands on it, will rip your hands off, is a whole lot of fun. So we were trying. We did catch some of the tegus. We got Night Anoles. We got curly tails. We got brown anole, like everything. And ironically, we really didn't get into a mess of snakes until we went north, which I totally thought would be different. Spent some time at the Florida Keys Bird Center, which my former grad student Aaron is now the director of. So that was wicked.
Nice.
And then I knew things were going to go well when we went north, because on our big travel day north, we stopped in a sand hill. And it's funny. I got away from the students, and I looked to my left, looked to my right, looked ahead, looked behind me. No one was around me. And I was like, I'm going to take a nap. So I just laid down on the ground, and I thought 10 minutes of sleep would be great. And I'm laying there, and my phone goes off, and it's my grad student Bjorn, and I answer it. I'm like, anytime they call you, they found something. So, or somebody's dying. Those are the options. So I'm going to lean heavily on they found something. And all Bjorn says is, hey, I got a hognose snake. And we were actually in the southern tip of the southern hognose snakes range, Heterodon cymus. And it was kind of like somebody took an electrical prod and shoved it straight into my heart. I did not want to take a nap anymore. I shot up and I was like, what color is it? And he's like, what? I was like, explain it. And he explained an eastern hognose snake perfectly. It didn't matter because I need locality pictures. My other former grad student, Alec, was there with his extremely high-end SLR. So we got a whole bunch of really good photographs for the book of that animal. And it refused to play dead. Easterns normally play dead immediately. This guy, he was awesome. And then he, of course, was released right back to the wilderness. And then went north, worked at the OCIC, Oregon Center for Indigo Conservation. This was one of the coolest things I've ever done with students. We outfitted outdoor enclosures for snakes. So we got there and they have this big building to keep indigos outside. And they were like, hey, you want to like outfit the enclosures? And I was like, yes, I do. This is beyond naturalistic. They're out freaking side. So these enclosures were like 10 feet long by 5 feet wide by 8 feet tall. I mean, they were rooms. And so the students and I, we put in artificial gopher tortoise burrows. We put in trees, palmettos, everything. It was one of the coolest things we've ever done. And then at the same time, we were outfitting the grounds with drift fences because we're starting a herp survey there. So we did that. And then at night, ironically, we went north. Those animals can handle a little bit of cold, which the southern animals can't. And we ended up, herping our brains out and found a whole bunch of my favorite Nerodia floridana, the Florida greens, which are the biggest Nerodia. And then the last day, everything came together. We went out with Dr. Terry Farrell. If like his page on Facebook, guys, he does amazing stuff. I've told a lot of people, if you want to see what Zac Loughman will be like when he's in his 60s, meet Terry, because Terry has very little F's to give at this point in his life. He just goes out, uses his semi-retired state to do videography of pygmy rattlesnakes. So he finds a pygmy, he puts a camera on it, he walks away, and then the camera records for 6 hours. And he gets all this crazy footage. So he was kind enough to take us to one of his study sites. And it was the last day. We got pygmies, we got big Florida water snakes. We watched an American bittern, which is not the easiest bird to find. I watched this whole thing go down, strike into the reeds and pull out an adult female striped crayfish snake, or Leodites, I think now, Alanine, possibly. Yeah, Leodites. And took that bird 30 minutes to kill and eat that snake. And it was one of those moments where, as a snake lover, I was like, oh, that's horrible. That's so sad. As a stone cold scientist, was like, data. So I was like, we videographied the entire thing. We took photographs. We timed the different behaviors. So we got the whole sequence. And I have to say, I was not expecting the bird to be that aggressive. And I was not expecting the snake to be able to tie knots with its body. That was extremely interesting to see. So, wow. And then we flew home. Oh, and we're flying out. You flew a lot, so you'll like this. So I'm sitting next to a girl who has never flown in an airplane before and lived in the middle of West Virginia her entire life. Okay. And we take off, and we could only afford Spirit because I wanted to keep the cost as low as possible for the students. Graduate students drove all their bags down, so it wasn't expensive at all. And so, we're in the liftoff. We're in the takeoff. Everything's going well, and we level out like abruptly. I was like, okay, this is neat. Like, I feel like we should be going up still. And then he starts banking to the east, the ocean, and I'm like, something's up. And then the pilot, in the most plain voice ever, comes across, and goes, attention, everyone. We hit a bird on the way on takeoff, and it is plastered across the windshield, and I can see approximately nothing. I was like, we're debating on whether we should go back or not, and we're going to be safe, and we're going to go back. We also don't really know about the structural integrity of the windshield currently, so we're going to be flying at low elevation until we land. And then he hung up the phone. And like, it was amazing. Half my kids were like, this is the best day ever. Half my kids were having a stroke internally. And then the other, the people around us, you were either doing one or the other. And so we land the plane, and I didn't know we were going to get to see said windshield. Let me tell you something. When a large airplane meets a duck, the duck loses.
Yeah.
It looked like somebody put the duck into a spritzer and just spritz the windshield with every bit of duck. It was pink, it was purple, it was red, and it was gray. And it was from one side of the windshield to the other. And the professor I took was an ornithologist. He was a bird biologist. And true to nerd, he asks the cat, like one of the flight attendants, hi, can I maybe take a picture of that windshield? Because I think I might be able to figure out what that bird was. Like, Matt, you can't do that. Like, terrorists take pictures of plane cockpits. So he was told abruptly no and ushered off the plane a little faster than the rest of us. So anyway, but it took him an hour to clean the windshield, and then we just flew home to Pittsburgh. So we ended on a high note, literally. So yeah, that was
I'm going to have to share. It's a similar story, but for our listeners, forgive me, because this has nothing to do with reptiles, nothing to do with animals at all. So I had flown to Atlanta, and I was going into our corporate office. I was actually interviewing for a position, and I'm a previous job, and it was a fly in, fly out. I wasn't staying the night. I had no baggage, no luggage, nothing. And it's a direct Evansville to Atlanta, drive to an hour and a half to where the corporate office was, do the interview, drive back to Atlanta, fly out. So I am now on my way back to Atlanta to fly out in the rental car. I'm in wearing a suit, it's all I've got on. And I had a slight cold over, a day or so. And so a constant kind of blowing the nose, right? Well, out of nowhere and in the middle of Atlanta traffic, for anyone who is familiar with Atlanta traffic, in the middle of Atlanta traffic, I just get a nosebleed out of nowhere. And I think it's probably getting dry and, all the blowing. But it's not just a little, no, it's a heavy nosebleed. I'm in a rental car, meaning most of us would have some kind of napkins or something shoved somewhere from either a fast food joint or something. No, there's nothing. I have nothing. And it's just running, and, just blood. And so I can't do anything. All I could do is just let it bleed until I could finally get to a gas station. But then the problem really happened. A sneeze came on. I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to shoot it all over me. I still had to fly home, And so I'm like, but if I do it all in my hands, I still have to grab the steering wheel. And so all I could think is just to point my face away from me the best I could. And I sneezed. And when I did, it was all over the windshield. And so it looked like someone had shot themselves in this car. So then I pull over at a gas station. Finally, I get out. This poor woman is pumping gas next to where I step out. There's blood all over my face. She sprayed all over this windshield. And I'm grabbing paper towels off the little thing that hangs there where you can clean your windshields with the squeegee, and all that. And I'm just wiping my face, wiping my hands, trying to get myself somewhat situated to at least walk into the gas station and not look like a, maniac. But so, yeah, anytime someone talks about something splattered across the windshield, I remember.
Did it yourself?
Yes. And it was on the inside,
Oh my God.
And so then I just took that rental and gave it back like nothing ever happened. And let them deal with it. So
wage stepping.
Yeah, it was
all right. Do we want to bounce on to the market update?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
okay.
as always, the market update is brought to us by Show Me Reptiles, Show Me Marketplace, and I can't say too much yet. I really can't say anything other than I had a phone call with Mickey today, and there is something that I think is pretty tough that Mickey is going to be rolling out with the Show Me Marketplace probably in late June, early July, that they've been working on. And, we kind of talked about the concept and how it's different than a lot of things out there. It's really, really cool. So I've been sworn to secrecy for now, but I just want to put out there's some more exciting things coming from Show Me. So this market update is going to primarily focus on Tinley, the Tinley show, because obviously this past weekend, that's where we were. I got to spend time with 3 of our 4 sponsors. I got to see Mickey. He was there for a little bit, hung out with Logan, got to talk to Logan and the Exo-terra guys. Funny side story about Logan. So there's an individual who will remain unnamed who attended Colubrid Fest, and he also attends the Tinleys, and he carries a backpack with bourbon in it.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes up and he brings these little Solo shot cups. I didn't even know Solo made those little red cups in shot size, but he brings them up every time. And I like bourbon. So, he twists my rubber arm and I go for it. Now, last Tinley, I don't know what it was he gave me, but one shot and I couldn't feel my feet. I mean, it was ridiculous. Just one, Zach, one shot. I mean, I tell people, I go, I don't know if I can walk right. I mean, it's man. So anyways, he comes up. We have a shot or 2 there on Friday, and then at the auction on Saturday night, I had talked to Logan again from Exo-terra to see if hey, you guys got a table, what you got going on, that kind of thing. Because it's if you've never been to the Tinley auction, it's packed. And if you can kind of slide in with some individuals who have a table, you're lucky. Well, I was over talking to some friends, and here comes my buddy bringing his bag of bourbon. And so we stand there, and I take 2 shots in a row. And I'm not a big drinker. I like bourbon, but it doesn't mean I drink it often. So I don't want anyone to think I'm some kind of lush, because that's not the case. Even as a big guy, it's not going to take a whole lot for me to feel it. So I take these 2 shots, and then I'm thinking, okay, we should probably go eat, because no. So I'm like, that's hitting fast. And I said, and about that time I feel my phone, vibrate, and I look, and it's from Logan, and it says, "Open shots at our table. Come over if you like." And I think, well, I gotta go take shots with Logan if Logan's offering. Well, I go over there and I'm like, "Where are the shots?" And he goes, "What are you talking about?" And I look down and there's empty seats. He said, "Open spots." But I'm 2 shots in and I'm old. So I read what I wanted to read. What I mean? He's just laughing at me, shaking his head. Okay, well, we're going to go eat. That's probably the right thing to do at this point. But I got to talk with Logan some, and then I also we're set up right next to ReptiChip. So JT from ReptiChip is right there, and got to talk with him quite a bit too. So it was really cool. I didn't get to talk to the RGI guys or gal because they weren't out there at this trip, but did get to talk with them, so that was neat. Okay, so let's talk about what I saw in Tinley, because it was different. This was different. So first, let's talk about the crowd. The crowd was different compared to the October Tinley, because the October Tinley was soft. I mean,
I remember you talking
for
about
Tinley, it wasn't as big as what it normally is. But this year, this time, definitely saw some movement. Saturday, it didn't start off as fast as what some Saturdays do. And in fact, after 2 hours in, and maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours in, we hadn't sold a snake. And I'm like, this isn't going well. But then the faucet kicked. It was boom, 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 boom in rapid succession. And so we ended up doing, I went back and looked, and we did just as much on Saturday as what we have done the past 2 years in a row, on the March Tinley Saturdays. So we were dead on par. And then on Sunday, normally Sunday is softer than Saturday. If a lot of what Sunday ends up being is kind of the vendors coming around and seeing, okay, what do you have left? What do you take for this? And, that's where more of the negotiations take place on Sundays. Not the case this Sunday. It was the line for Sunday looked as if from what I saw, I mean, it was as long, if not longer than Saturdays. And Sunday even had bad weather. It was snowing whenever we went in. But Sunday was hopping, and we actually did just as much Sunday as we did Saturday. So with that combined, it ended up being the best Tinley we've had ever.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it was really neat. And I heard a lot of Josh Alder, who we've had on. I saw where he reported the same, that it was the best Tinley they've ever had. And I think that it may have been a good one for many. But now let's kind of talk about the mix and really what I was seeing from a different species perspective. I know hognose were still moving. We had hognose breeders. We talked to Jeff Gilwood Jr. there. I bought like 10 from him. So it looks like he was doing pretty well. Snakes Unlimited, I think that's the name of you. If I'm getting it wrong, forgive me. That they do hogs, and we hung out with them quite a bit, and I think that they did pretty well too. They were at Colubrid Fest, and then we talked to them at Pomona too. They're awesome. But the mix is certainly starting to shift.
Dun, dun, dun.
There were more colubrids at Tinley than I've ever seen at Tinley. That more diversity as far as the tables go. Now, there were a lot of repeats, so it's kind of, if you go to Midwest shows, most of the colubrids that I saw are the colubrids you would typically see at a Midwest show. There were just a lot more of them, maybe a few more combos. There was still diversity out there. I mean, when you've got like Josh out there, when you got myself, the Zirkles, Eric, Westmoreland, you're going to see diversity. And then there were the importers, and you'd see some of that too. But there were definitely a lot more colubrids than I've ever seen available. So it's what we've been discussing as far as seeing that percentage, that market share percentage increase. It's starting to happen in the shows, and I think that's for two reasons. One, it's the natural. If you're going to continue to do this as a business, you have to follow to a degree where some of the market goes to keep things, to keep things moving. But also, I know for a fact that several promoters of different shows, Tinley included, the NARBC included, are gearing their vendor lists to have more variety.
Yeah.
They're wanting more and more. And I mean, Potter flat out said that to me, as we were having a conversation, on it, and me trying to get another table. So I know that's as some vendors fall off, and I'm going to have to say it, ball python vendors, as ball python vendors fall off, they're ensuring that they're getting, whether it's emerald tree boas, whether it's colubrids, whether it's monitors, whether, something, they're getting variety, on the table. I did talk to some ball python breeders, and it really seems like the consensus is ball pythons are still selling. You're just not going to get the top dollar that, they were 2 years ago, so the ones that accept that and, put them out for where it feels like they should be, seem to be doing pretty well. They're still moving. Just maybe, with we'll call it, their margins aren't as high, as what they were. But for the most part, everyone seemed to be pretty happy. I did pick up some things for the shop. Tim Richardson of Extreme Exotics. He and I, one, I love that little guy to death. He's about as wild as they come. Watched him buy a black monitor out at the auction. I mean, the thing was amazing. But he breeds Australian geckos and basically Australian species, frill dragons, pure Aussie frillies and things like that. And so, I don't work with any of that stuff. Well, he doesn't really work with any bamboos or really, too many snakes in general. So, and he owns a shop in St. Louis. So I send him snakes. He sends me, Australian stuff that, he produces. And so I came back with some things from him, some gargoyles and such. I got another Oregon red spotted garter from Amy.
Nice.
Thank you, Amy. You're a sweetheart. Rob, got to hang out with Rob a little bit. So I think send some snakes his way. But I also picked up some nice Chaos line gray bands from Michael Ogle, I believe is his last name, the curator of herpetology at the Knoxville Zoo. Got to meet him in Knoxville at the last IHS and like him a lot. So got to chat with him a little bit and hope to have him on the show. So
we do.
As a reminder, Michael, if
you're coming on, man.
That's right, man. We really want to have you on board. I think that's going to be a fun episode. So, I got to chat with him and several others. And that's really why I say it's as much of a vacation as it is work, because getting to see so many friends. And on top of that, I mean, I can't stress enough how it's amazing, but it's kind of wild for us at the same time on how many people come up and talk about this show. Whether I get stopped in a crowd. So it's not just they see Metazotics. I mean, I get stopped in a crowd and people will, hey, just want you to know how much we love the show, listen all the time. And it feels so good. It's like really so validating, for what we do here. But people, and what I love even more than the compliments are it really feels like almost like connected, because some of the people came up and it's people I've never met before, but their question is, so how's the second shop going? And just feeling that kind of support, and that there's that, our listeners they follow what's going on in our lives, and it just makes me feel just wonderful. And I mean, we talk so much about community and community building, and that's how it is, so, but yeah, just getting to talk to so many listeners, and got some great feedback on potential episodes from a few. Thought that was neat. So, but again, going back to, bringing this swinging towards the market again, we definitely saw where tax season is tax season. It's happening. I will also say that while it's not slowing sales yet, I talked before about issues that the tariffs, will inevitably cause, and they are happening already. I know of at least two of my providers, that I get things from, that I've already mentioned prices are going up on this, and this, because sometimes it's not necessarily products, but maybe pieces of the product come from over there, which affect, in big ways. So that's already, starting. And unfortunately, it's going to cause me to have to lift the price on a couple things as well, because it costs me more. I also heard something today that may not affect the colubrid market or snakes typically, but it's just another piece. So there may not be any silkworm food coming in for the next 30 to 60 days. If that happens, no, which means that's going to raise the price. Now, worst case, if I could get silkworms, to continue to come to me, I can actually keep feeding them, because they eat mulberry leaves, or the food that's derived from that. I've got mulberry trees behind this building. I've got them on my property. So, I mean, we could do it if we needed to. But obviously, the price of the food that is here is going to increase, which is going to cause the price of silkworms to increase, which is probably going to end up, it's already not the cheapest insect that you could feed, even though it's like the most nutritious. I just see that kind of going to the wayside potentially if things don't change, in the next 30 to 60, and that's just, one piece. So another part of the market that to keep an eye on, that how's it going to affect things, as we continue to go. So, but I think that's what I'm going to have for the market today. So, and cool. We've got a couple weeks before we hit numbers again, and we'll see. Kind of at that point, we'll be, I'd say, about 3/4 of the way through tax season. So,
yeah, well, Kathy and I haven't done ours yet. So,
yeah, me either.
I'm sure there's lots of people like us. Okay, I'm going to do science update brought to us by Rare Genetics Inc. As always, we're proud of our sponsorship with them and our collaborations with them. Keep the sheds coming. We know that they're working their butts off. Kayla messages us all the time, just giving us updates on what Ben's up to in the lab. So keep shipping those things to them, and those things being the skins, and we'll get more colubrid tests. And if you need your snake sexed, they have that test available for the vast majority of snakes that are present. So reach out to them. That is the way to confirm it. I have had yet another case of, I probed the thing, thought it was a female, and then I probed it again, thought it was a male, put the pair together, it was a male. So even sometimes the probing can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. So it's definitive when you're looking at DNA. Okay, so
with that being said, I want to give a quick shout out to Corey in our nursery. I walked through there today, and she's probably got 30 of the little manila envelopes.
Nice.
And I see that, where she's been keeping sheds from all these babies, writing the morph, writing the species, and we'll be shipping them out. So thank you, Corey. Every little bit helps.
All right. So today with our science update, if you're on YouTube, you can see it. If you're not on YouTube, I'm going to try to do this so that you can understand while driving in your car. But if you really dig this particular update, just go to YouTube, find this episode, because there's some visuals with this particular article. So last year, midwinter, late winter, a paper came out, Tittle et al. 2024. It was a beast of a paper. It was actually in Science, which if you follow Science, you know that the journal Science, Science and Nature, those are the two top journals. And it actually had to deal with snakes. And it has multiple authors on this thing. And these are heavyweights when it comes to snake taxonomy, snake evolution. And the title of the paper today that we're going to be talking about is The Macroevolutionary Singularity of Snakes, which sounds boring until you understand what the hell we're talking about. And so basically, in a nutshell, what this paper was trying to figure out is a key question in biology. So whether you like what I'm about to say, if you're a herpetologist and you understand evolution, we no longer really think snakes are that special. Snakes are actually a clade of limbless squamates, and squamates are the lizards and the snakes. There's far more lizards than snakes. And so there's quite a few people in evolution land that have a tendency to just think of snakes as highly derived lizards. The old taxonomy used to be, you got the squamates, and then there's the lizards and the snakes. We now know snakes are nestled in this group called the Toxicifera, which includes things like monitor lizards, helodromatids, the fetids and the helas, alligator lizards, iguanas, bearded dragons. All those things are in Toxicifera. And then we have the Serpentes clade. What this paper looked at, though, is why have snakes been so successful after the dinosaurs compared to lizards? And they have some pretty cool, there we go, wrong. This is really hard for me, guys. I'm doing multiple things electronically, so there you go. But basically, what this manuscript looked at was a whole lot of stuff. We're going to look at this pretty picture. And they basically came to the conclusion that snakes are beautiful examples of this whole macroevolutionary singularity thing. And what that means is, in English, snakes are able to find an opportunity ecologically and then evolve incredibly fast to occupy and dominate that opportunity. And so what they did to determine this, the authors, is they did this really cool thing called trait-based analysis, where you look at, you take a particular species and then you fill in all these different biological traits. So you look at, what does the species eat fish? Yes or no? It's a binary data set for the nerds out there. Does the thing eat mammals? Yes or no? Does it eat small mammals? Yes or no? Does the thing eat amphibians? Yes or no? Salamanders? Yes or no? And so you basically extrapolate out this huge data set. And you can also look at where those prey live. Does the animal in question feed in water? Does it feed on land? Does it feed next to water? Does it feed up in trees? Does it feed underground? And so you get all these traits, and then you run this analysis called a PCA, which is a particular type of statistic. And they produce these really cool images, figures. And basically what they were able to show is they created a hypothesis to explain why snakes are so successful and diverse, and lizards are they're not lacking behind them, but we haven't seen the proliferation of lizards that we've seen in recent time that we've seen in snakes. And basically what they determined and this figure kind of shows it, is that if you're on YouTube, you can see it. If you're driving in your car, I'm going to try to explain it. We got a vertical axis, and basically at the top of the axis, it says more terrestrial prey. At the bottom of the axis, it says more aquatic prey. Then we have a horizontal axis that says, to the left, more invertebrate prey, to the right, more vertebrate prey. And by plotting these things out, what you end up with is lizards, as a general rule, are stuck eating a whole bunch of terrestrial invertebrates, as a general rule. Now, there are obviously some lizards that kind of extrapolate out to terrestrial verts. Monitors come to mind, tegus come to mind. But when you look at lizards as a whole, they're primarily invert eating, terrestrial feeding animals. When we look at snakes are at a different part of the graph. They go from the top. Oh, and the other thing is, lizards aren't really going into water to eat. When you look at snakes, though, snakes will go and eat something on land, and they'll eat something in water, and they'll eat something next to the water. Some species of snake in this analysis, 50% of their diet comes from land, 50% of their diet comes from the water. And then the other thing that's really cool is the snakes are heavily skewed towards verts. And so basically what these authors say is one of the reasons why we have the diversity of snakes that we have is that snakes were able to evolve along with all the vertebrates that survived the mass extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs. And as those vertebrates, mammals and birds and other reptiles, proliferated, snakes proliferated right alongside them to eat them. And so every major vert radiation, you've got a radiation of snakes. And so it's pretty cool. And the other thing is, ecologically, they're plastic enough. They got enough variability that they can feed on things in water and in land, because if you've ever watched a snake, you can take a black rat snake out of the bush, chuck it in the lake, and it's going to swim away perfectly fine. So it's a pretty cool paper. I touched the surface with it. That's what we can explain and keep light for a podcast. But if you want to read more, as always, anytime I do these papers, I got them. So email me, zloughman@westliberty.edu, and I will happily send you a copy of the paper. And we're good to go on that one. So pretty cool stuff. All right. So with that being said, our guest has stepped away for a second.
He's back.
And he's back. There we go.
Well, I'll tell you, before we do that, I'll show you, that your updates do carry some weight, because
oh, look at that.
I had to, go ahead. And it wasn't just me. There's been a couple people right here that's come in shop. Bailey, in fact.
Nice.
He ordered it right then and there when standing here and seeing it. And I told him, what is it, like $17 right now?
Yes.
I'm like, yeah, it's like $100-something book for $17. And he pulled it up and he goes, 96% off or something like that. He goes,
Yep.
Bought.
Yep.
Hits his buttons. So yeah, very cool, man.
Heck yeah. Well, no, that warms my heart, man. It's great. As a teacher, I spend time talking to people that pay me. They are paying my salary to tell them, go read this. And some of them read the stuff I say, some of them don't. And then I got this podcast and I'm like, yeah, this book's cool. And I've had like 20, 30 people send me pictures of the book, and then I see it on their so it's very rewarding to see that people are actually like taking my word on these things and reading things. That's pretty cool. So,
and for those of you that aren't watching, I'm referring to the snakes of the United States and Canada. And again, this is a nice book, lots of info.
Beefy.
Yeah, and I mean, great pictures. It's a good 2 inches. And I mean, it's literally like $17 right now, hardback. So get on Amazon. And I mean, it was ticking down. I think it said like 11 left or something like that when I bought it. So check it out. It's cool. Nice. So,
all right. Are we ready to bring on Stephen?
I think we are. And as always now, our guest portion is brought to you by ReptiChip. We thank ReptiChip for being a sponsor. And we look forward to a continued partnership with them as they dive deeper and deeper into the colubrid market when it comes to the bedding and colubrid needs. So,
all right. So today we have with us the one, the only Stephen Kush.
Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. Thank you for coming on.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. As we were talking before we were recording, and obviously many people hear Stephen Kush and there's an immediate association, scrub pythons. I was guilty of that. And then I think you were on Joe's show, Colubrid Corruption. I remember seeing like, why is the scrub guy on the Colubrid podcast? And then I listened to it. I was like, holy crap, he keeps a ton of colubrids. So obviously it was just a matter of time. We met Stephen at Pomona. Or I met Stephen at Pomona, and he was one of our got to have him on guests from that show. So we're very happy that you're here today.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, I was going to say, was your episode with Joe recent?
So we've done 2. It was one a few weeks ago, and then one like a year prior.
Okay, must be because coincidentally, I was just walking through the showroom earlier, and they had your episode with Joe playing on our television. I'm just kind of walking through it, and they have no idea who we're recording with tonight. My associates didn't. So it's just, I thought it was very coincidental that I walked by.
Awesome.
I'm like, all right. Okay.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
All right, Stephen, for our listeners, if they don't know you, we like to start at the beginning, so let's just start with, how did you get into reptiles in the first place?
Yeah, man, it's been my whole life. I was one of the kids of my generation who, Steve Irwin was one of the first things we saw on TV. I was very fortunate to grow up in Chicago around a really heavy reptile scene. I grew up blocks away from where the Chicago Herpetological Society did their monthly meetings at the Nature Museum. So I was involved from pretty early on. For anybody who went to Tinley Park kind of pre-COVID, you walk in, you see that giant alligator sitting in the middle of the floor right before you enter the show. That's Bubba the alligator from Jim Nessie. He was originally in Chicago. He's in Florida now. I had the original Bubba at my 4th birthday party when I was dressed head to toe like Steve Irwin and running around being a maniac. So I think the writing was on the wall early on. I had a few just kind of serendipitous moments throughout my life that let me continue to do this. One of them being that my pediatrician growing up was actually a very active, high up member in the Chicago Herp Society. So, and he was a colubrid guy, really. I mean, he had, Eastern indigos.
Nice.
He had, like Mullendorfi, different Crebos, yellowtails, unicolors. Japanese rat snakes, like really, really cool stuff. So I was introduced to a lot of that really early on. Trans-Pecos rat snakes. Like I probably had my hands on a Trans-Pecos rat snake when I was 5 or 6 years old. Then probably around time I was like 8 or 9 years old, found everything on YouTube, like snake bites and all that stuff. And then I learned that there was even an industry around this. Because the Chicago Herp Society, I believe they still do it, but they throw an event every year called Reptile Fest, which is basically the same setup as any other reptile show, except it is purely educational, no sales at all. And all the members come and bring their animals for kids to interact with and stuff like that. So I went to that event from when I was probably 5 years old onward. As soon as I had snakes, I was there showing people my snakes, talking about them all weekend. So, then finding about the industry side of things, I'm like, oh, people actually do this professionally? Like, that's the coolest thing in the entire world. Like, what does one have to do for that to be the reality of their life? So, just was constantly doing research. And as we all do, like the ball python thing was the first thing I really kind of latched onto. But then really quickly, my interest started to go here and there. Green tree pythons were one early on that really caught my eye. When I was in 8th grade in my school, we had this thing where like every 8th grader, one of the last weeks of school had to do an internship somewhere. And I naturally wanted to do something regarding reptiles. And at that Reptile Fest show, I got connected with Rob Carmichael, who's the curator of the Wildlife Discovery Center, which he's now in Tennessee. He used to be in Lake Forest, Illinois, which is about an hour north of Chicago. So I got my little internship there for a week. And I was just book smart on snakes for someone who was 13 years old and kind of fit in a little bit too well, where after the week was gone, like, you want to keep coming back. And, by the time the summer was over, he realized that I was now a freshman in high school. And was like, oh, okay. Didn't know that. I guess you could keep giving me free labor. So, and, I when I was old enough, got on staff there, ended up working there through high school, and got a lot of experience with different species, primarily different pythons, like, olive pythons, Indian pythons, green trees. They had a big venomous collection, especially early on, with king cobras, Mangshan vipers, mambas, a bunch of different rattlesnakes that, species I'd known about, and a lot of them I'd never even seen in person. So being around all that, just, if there was any chance that I was going to be like a ball python guy, it was over within about 30 minutes of being there. Different monitor lizards, crocodilians. I mean, it was heaven for somebody who in my position at the time. And then, just kept growing my collection at home. I was very lucky to have supportive parents who let me do it. And eventually they just kind of realized, like, we're not going to be able to stop him. This is not going to change. So they kind of let it go. And obviously I showed that I was dedicated to what I was doing. And then kept kind of, the pythons were like the main thing that I was really keyed in on early on. White lips, olives, Timors, etc., and then kind of worked my way up to the scrub pythons. And as soon as I got my first scrub python in my hands, I'm like, I found my life's purpose. Like there was no question for me instantaneously. This is like the coolest animal I've ever interacted with. And but yeah, and then from there the story continues to where I am today. It's quite the ride. So it's been quite the ride.
Certainly sounds like it. So what are you keeping now? What's the collection look like? I know it's diverse.
Yeah, it's pretty diverse. So it's about like 40% or so scrub pythons, all the available species and locality types in the hobby outside of Indonesia or Australia as well. I have, and do my best to produce as many of them as I can. Definitely have some localities where I have some of the only ones in the country or the world outside of Indonesia. So I definitely take that pretty seriously. But then the second largest group within my collection are my venomous, which are primarily rattlesnakes. They're all montane species. So outside of the rattlesnakes, I have some Central American palm vipers, and then my only old world are a group of Mangshan vipers. So yeah, they're spectacular. Yeah, it's mostly little tiny rattlesnakes and vipers, and then I just have these 4 of them are big, giant old world vipers. But I wouldn't have it any other way. They're absolutely incredible. And then species wise, the colubrids take up the most as far as the number of species goes. But then as far as like total snakes relative to the collection, it's probably the smallest of the three big groups, I guess. I have a few odds and ends, little pythons that I've had for a long time, kind of like almost pets at this point. They've had for like 10 plus years. But yeah, I think I have like 17 or 18 colubrid species. So, and the spilotes are the primary ones that I'm working with.
Gotcha. What's gearing you in that direction?
I've just always really loved spilotes. Their physical presence, their size, their agility, how visual I love visually oriented snakes that are confident. That's part of why I love the scrub python so much.
You just described a scrub python, dude.
Yeah, I mean they are kind of a colubrid equivalent in some ways. But just like, I mean, to tie it all the way back to when I was a kid. At those reptile fest shows, right behind me were Jason Hood and Gavin Brink with all of their Anax and their sulphurus, their Mexicanus. So like I've been around that from when I was really young, and I was always fascinated by those snakes. When I got my first Pilatus, I think I was 16 or 17, I was like, wow, this snake is incredible. And similarly to the scrub pythons, I realized pretty soon that the bad reputation that they have really was unfounded. It's just a matter of understanding their behavior and not putting yourself and the snake in a situation that's going to stress that animal and create a defensive reaction. All the spilotes that I've kept, as soon as you have them in your hand, the thing is not going to bite you unless you start waving in front of it.
Yeah.
But in the enclosure, if you stare at it for too long and then put your hand in there, it's going to bite you immediately. It's just a matter of understanding that snake's behavior and creating a situation where that animal isn't stressed and not going to react accordingly.
Wow. So in addition to the spilotes, what are some other colubrid species that you keep?
As far as like a big group goes, I have a lot of Pituophis. So the Mexican pine snakes, some of the North American stuff, bull snakes, northern pines, etc. That's probably the second largest. Numbers wise, I probably have more than I do of spilotes, but that's kind of where like a lot of my focus goes is on the spilotes. I really love the Pituophis as well. And then aside from that, some Transpecos rat snakes, some tricolor hognose, Cameron Highland cave racers, stuff like that. I'm probably forgetting some stuff inevitably on the spot, but yeah, kind of those kind of species, mostly larger colubrids. Obviously, the tricolor hogs are pretty small, and the Transpecos, mostly larger colubrids.
So what about you described spilotes, which is neotropical arboreal colubrid, but then you've got Pituophis, which excluding Geni is temperate fossorial colubrid.
Yeah.
The thing that seems to unite them is they're both big. But what about pits? Attracted you to them?
I mean, it's another one. I've been around them for a very long time. A lot of the times it's just the natural variation. I love snakes where you can take like a genus and there's this locality, this subspecies, this natural variety. The scrub pythons are that way. The Mexican and Southwest U.S. rattlesnakes are that way. And Pituophis for me really easily fit into that kind of description of a snake. I love their behavior. I love how confident they are. I love how easy they are to start as babies. You
can't beat them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't feel comfortable, obviously, as most of us do, selling snakes right out of the egg, right out of mom. I'll take someone's money that day on a Mexican pine snake because I'm like, this thing is going to be fine. It's going to take the fuzzy. It's going to take the fuzzy. It's going to take the fuzzy, and I'm going to ship it out, and they're going to do fine with that snake. But to me, like, I have a lot of species that are not for the new keeper, be it venomous stuff, scrub pythons. To me, some of the Pituophis, especially the smaller ones like the Geni or vertebralis or stuff like that, can be for a new snake keeper, and a naturally beautiful, confident, good eating, snake that's not super aggressive, not going to just start eating you spontaneously like a king snake. It checks a lot of the boxes in my opinion of a great starter snake, and one that you can't get bored of. If you get bored of a Pituophis, you don't like snakes. You should never keep snakes.
Right.
And I didn't mention this during the market update, but that was Pitiophis continues to be a class that you don't see as often in the Midwest at shows. We talked about how heavy we saw them in Pomona on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And my guess is you probably see them decent at the Texas shows, kind of anything Southwest and whatnot. But at the Midwest, there's just a handful. I know I had the biggest variety of Pitiophis on my table in Tinley, but for all honesty, it's because I got them from someone in Arizona. These weren't animals I produced; these were some that I got in, picked all of them I wanted, and then we moved the rest. So that is a species, like I said, that you don't see often, as often out here. It's for some reason they just haven't caught on as much. I don't know why.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. That's an interesting observation.
Cool. Okay. So I have a question that I've thought a lot about, and you are the first guest we've had that I know of I can finally ask this question to.
Okay.
So I've had people say with my job. So with my job, I go to zoos, I go to zoo conferences, I go to IHS, I go to this kind of nerdy academic side of herpetoculture a lot. And I'm also in the business of training students. And one of the inadequacies of our program that I'm trying to fix, but I can't because when I get to it, is the whole venomous side of things. So you're one of the first guests we've had that keeps colubrids, keeps pythons, and keeps venomous.
Okay.
Is there anything about taking care of colubrids now that you have a venomous collection of your own? And before I go any further, I do not want this question to be interpreted as if you can take care of a bull snake, you can have a Mangshan viper because you can. So I'm saying that out loud right now.
Disclosure noted.
Yes. Okay. I'm just curious. Are there any skill sets you see taking care of colubrids that might translate more to you learning venomous? We'll leave it that way. Then I'm not saying you now keep a rattlesnake, but versus taking care of pythons, or is it the other way? That taking care of the pythons preps you more for taking care of the venomous, in your opinion?
I guess, at least from my journey, it was 100% the scrub pythons that prepared me for the venomous. And mostly just based on learning how to use a snake hook, learning how snakes balance on a hook, how they react to being touched by hooks in certain ways. Just like, and there's something I was cognizant of doing from a younger age. I always knew that I wanted to work with venomous in one capacity or another. I'm like, I'm going to feel more comfortable with a snake hook than I am behind the wheel of a car. Like this is going to be just like part of my body. So that's the biggest thing over anything is, you can work with snakes as much as you want, but if you're not familiar with how a snake hook feels at the end of if that doesn't feel like your arm, you might want to do a little bit more prep work. I feel like the colubrids, it probably depends on which venomous you're comparing it to from a behavioral standpoint.
Same thing.
From a practicality standpoint, if you can take care of a colubrid, at least a rattlesnake is going to be a walk in the park because they are lower metabolism and, lower maintenance. They're, like a banded rock rattlesnake to me is the easiest reptile to take care of in the entire world. Like they brumate for like 5 months of the year. They eat infrequently, small meals. They're low waste. You can set them up bioactive, like an arid bioactive, and literally never touch that snake. Like you'd have that snake in the same cage for 10 years if you wanted to, and never remove it in case of or unless like you have an emergency. But as with a python, the same thing can go with a colubrid, where you can just use that snake as a means of training yourself on how to use a hook, how to shift a snake properly, learning behaviors. I can't really think of, I guess with Pitiophis, you could probably do some degree equate behaviors to some of the larger rattlesnakes like diamondbacks or, timber or prairie, something like that. But to a certain extent, I think from a behavioral standpoint, they often can more resemble pythons in some of the ways that they live. Yeah, Max just threw in the private chat Boega for our boreal vipers. Yeah, sure. And that's one thing I missed earlier. I do have a few Boega as well. I love Boega. But yeah, I mean, just anything that will kind of test your abilities a little bit and really and make you learn how to use that snake hook. That's the biggest of anything. And I think for me, maybe more than an individual species or a colubrid, python, boa, just learning different species of snakes and learning kind of some universal truths of behavior of snakes. All snakes are snakes at the end of the day. I will say, if you want to work elapids, spilotes are great for that. I mean, I have a friend who's a big time venomous guy who keeps a lot of mambas, like holding one of my tiger rats. Like, this is a mamba. Like, this is just a mamba. It's just not venomous. Like, every little bit of behavior is pretty much the same. So I don't have any elapids. I will never have any elapids. Fuck that.
Yeah. I'm telling you, when it comes to reptiles, there's very little that scare me. Even venomous, very little that scare me. Mambas, no, absolutely not. Not going to happen. That was the one snake I watched Steve Irwin sweat whenever he was messing with. You could see the man was scared. And, I know how much I struggle trying to hook Carinata. They suck trying to hook them to get them out of the cage if they're in it. And so, I'm like, there ain't no way I would even attempt that.
No, I mean, like watching videos, there's that classic video of Terry Phillip at Reptile Gardens feeding that rack of monocle cobras.
Yeah.
The chaos of how bad they are at striking food, and they're running, and they're like I'd rather be a cashier at McDonald's than have to do that. Like, this is like the worst thing ever. I don't know. Yeah, the vipers, to me, I get my venomous fix, but I also I set up enclosures for them. It's like the room is like walking into an exhibit hall for me. And they're so different than like the scrub pythons from just a physical standpoint that it gives me a really cool separate, I can get away from the scrub pythons. I can see, work with something that's entirely different climate, different behaviors, different body structure, different scale structure. Like, everything about them is damn near the opposite, aside from if I had a room full of lizards, maybe that would be different. So yeah, it's just, it's fun.
So go ahead, Clint.
I was going to say, so you talk about, how you have your vipers set up kind of like a, display there. How do you set your spiloides up? How are you housing those?
So, yeah, they're in like 4x2x4 cages with a bunch of branches and plants and stuff like that. So yeah, and they're to me, they're like the best display snake. They're as close as you can get to having like a cage of tree monitors in snakes. They will be watching you from across the room, but in a very curious way, not in a defensive way. They pop their heads up and they're looking around. They interact with each other. They seem to thrive cohab. I have my pairs cohabbed year round. It's just so cool. Like, I could just sit there and just stare at them for much longer than I have time to stare at them for. They're just so interesting. And, a big, beautiful snake in a display sitting up, draped across branches and whatnot. It just, to me, that's just so awesome. So yeah, nice display enclosures with a bunch of branches and some plants and stuff.
Very cool. So on the Spilotes front, which species do you keep?
So I mean, I have the three that are kind of present in the hobby of Spilotes, Pilatus, Mexicanus, and Sulphuris. So yep, all three, but majority Mexicanus.
Very cool. Have you raised them from babies? Did you get them as adults? Like, what's the origin story?
Yeah, I had a friend who had a good sized group of like sub-adult animals that he ended up moving on. And I was lucky enough to get my hands on those. And then I also have gotten a pair of the Tamaulipas Honduran crosses that Jason Hood has made, and I raised those up from babies. And now I have babies of my own that I'm raising up. So
very
kind of all the above.
Very nice.
So on the Spilotes front, you said that you keep them in naturalistic enclosures. Is that what you raise them in? Like we interestingly just had Roy on the last episode with Postal Nautis.
So
it was not planned, by the way, listeners, but it worked out. But anywho, he talked about keeping babies in Exo-terras like the ones behind me here in naturalistic. But I know the one clutch of Spilotes that I've worked with that we had drop at the university from our one and only female, they were the biggest pain in the ass to feed until I talked to Jason Hood, who said, pick up a pinky, kind of wave it in their face, let them bite it, and then freeze. And that is literally how we got them all to eat. And that was my job. So fun.
So I'm kind of like the opposite of Roy with how I've raised mine. Pretty simple tub setup, just, hide water bowl, 3D printed perch or something like that. And just kind of, ambient room temperature, 80 degrees, let them do their thing, keep the stress low. And like so far with this, I just produced my first clutch. So, pretty low sample size as far as how they are to deal with. But from talking to Jason and others, they like Jason told me that feeding with them, can be pretty good if the clutch itself ends up being solid out of the egg. And that has been the case so far. Just leave a, live pink, like a live peach fuzzy to fuzzy mouse in there. The switching them over to frozen wasn't particularly difficult. Some weeks they won't want a frozen, and then I'll just put a live in there and I come back in half an hour and it's gone. I'm like, hopefully they'll stop doing that at some point. But, for now, hey, if you're eating and growing, that's fine with me. I think it'd be really cool to raise them in naturalistic setups. With what I'm doing in my setup, it's just kind of impractical at the moment, but in the future that might be something to explore.
Well, this continues to go on with a conversation, really with an ongoing theme and conversation within our podcast for over the past few years now, a couple of years, that there are so many ways to reach the same level of success.
Sure.
And we talk about sterile versus naturalistic versus, let me take the word versus out, sterile as well as naturalistic, as well as bioactive, because it's not a versus. That's, any of these situations can work if done properly and ensuring that the animals are getting what they need. So I love that you don't do it just like Roy, and that both of you are successful in what you're doing. That I love hearing that. And it continues to give us a voice to be able to put that message out to everyone that quit judging each other, that there's more than one way to do this and it still be right. So
yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I see all those debates and fights going on online. I'm like, I don't have enough time for this nonsense. I know what my snakes are doing right in front of me. And, there's obviously certain, like, you don't want to have an adult Spilotes in a tub. That would be pretty terrible. But, a scared, high-strung baby that needs to eat might be what it needs for a temporary matter until this animal has some size and some confidence to it. So, and I think it's just kind of taking your ego as the keeper out of the equation, and not trying to make the snake conform to what you want it to do, and do what the snake itself is showing you it needs. And once you're able to get that snake to the point where you want to have it in a nice display enclosure or whatever, go for it. I never discourage anybody from going as elaborate as they possibly want to, but I always kind of give that qualifier of, if it doesn't work, you're going to have to go backwards, because otherwise you might not have a snake after very long. So
it's, I find myself, it's funny because I'm gonna have to take it to ball pythons for just a second, because that species tends to be one that very commonly, when someone will buy a baby, then go put it in a 40-gallon breeder, type of 36 by 18 by 24 or whatnot, then suddenly it stops eating. And it's, and so I've now had to kind of tell them, instead, because I don't want to have to buy another enclosure and then have to buy this enclosure later. It's like, okay, you can buy your big setup, but if it doesn't eat, here's what you do. Get you a 6-quart Sterilite, put it in there, set it up with water, set it up basic, and you can put that inside your 40-gallon breeder enclosure and use the heat from it, use all that, so you don't have to use it twice. But no, I understand that comment, because that's something I'm talking about a lot as well, that sometimes big can be a problem when it
Sure.
comes to
Yeah.
a little snake. So,
and on that topic, this is actually something that I find very interesting. So we have a lot of snakes that do really well in the tub to get started, and then they kind of grow out of the tub, and then you take them from the tub, move them to the vivarium, and then we get that kind of, they either seem to take off and they're easy and we're good, but you also can get that kind of stress response. Now they're not eating.
Yeah. Sure.
And then you're kind of stuck. Like, what the hell do I do? This thing hasn't eaten for a week or 2 or 3. Do I put it back in the tub? Do I force it? So have you experienced anything like that with rearing your Spilotes?
No.
And what did you do?
I mean, I know I haven't, but I think that's mostly just because I just was never in that situation to like, okay, am I putting him in the cage too early? Like, by the time I put him in cages, like, yeah, you're definitely ready to go in the cage. And I mean, a lot of that had to do with that the fact that I moved and I had a bunch of cages, but they weren't assembled. I'm like, I'm not going to assemble these big ass cages just to move them. Like, I'll move and then assemble the cages afterwards. So, I had them in setups that I wouldn't love. They were still fine, larger tubs, but nothing like a 4x2x4. So by the time they were going in those cages, I'm like, you've been ready for a while.
Gotcha.
I feel like I'm always erring on the side of making sure that snake is more ready than not in across the board with any species. I've experienced setbacks with snakes where I'm like, gosh, if I just was a little more patient, I wouldn't have gone through this. Like my sulphurus is a good example where I've learned with them, there is such thing as too much food for those snakes.
Really?
And yeah, like I have an extra mouse. The sulphurus were eating really well today. I'll give that a third mouse, and I come back the next morning and 2 of them are back out, and now the snake doesn't eat for a month. I'm like, and now this thing's growth is slowed for a while. It's slow to get back onto food. It might only want to eat 1 chick at a time, where it was eating like a small rat previously, or whatever it may be. I'm like, man, if I had just stuck with its 2 mice that I was feeding it that day and waited till next week to feed it, I would be so much further ahead than I am right now with that individual. So it's definitely testing my level of patience I'm able to exercise at any point in time. So I always kind of err on the side of caution with those kind of things when I can.
But you don't learn that until you're in it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you can listen to a podcast like this and try to, hear someone else's experience, but sometimes it has to hurt you before you really learn that lesson.
Yeah.
No, I have a bunch of grow outs in my office at school. That's where actually my growing Pichophis collection is up there.
Nice.
And I bought a pair of of blonde Deserticola Great Basin gophers.
Okay.
They're one of the few things I got from Jason Nelson at Pomona. And they're little worms. They're not big at all. And I was feeding them and came back to a regurg and was like, mother of God, no. Because we've had crypto in our school, and I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
And so I quickly, took the vomit, and we have some leftover antigen tests. And I know before I go any further, antigen test for the presence of crypto, not serpentis. But given that the thing regurgitated, I thought if there's crypto, it'll be in the gut. So I ran the antigen test, nothing. Then I ran another antigen test, nothing. Then I ran a third antigen test, nothing. We went up to 5, nothing. And then I went back, sat at my desk, was like, so what the hell? Like, why did that thing regurg yesterday? And then I remembered, absent-minded professor here threw in 3 pinkies instead of 1. I lost track of which tub I was on and got distracted. And I was like, oh, well, son of a bitch. Yeah. And that thing hasn't eaten now in 2 weeks. It's the same thing you were talking about. So that stupid distraction point has now caused this thing to basically have this traumatic event. And now it's not feeding. Actually, that's a lie. It ate today. So
awesome.
Now hopefully all's well when I get in, to work tomorrow, but I'm assuming it will be. But yeah, you can't push. I've heard a lot of people say you can't give growing colubrids enough food. And I think there's a certain level of truth to that, but there's also overeating. Like you can give any one of us can eat and eat and eat. We're going to reach a point where we're just going to go boom. So,
Yeah.
And I think it also depends on the colubrid as well.
Yes.
You know, a false water cobra compared to, an Amazon puffing snake or whatever it may, draw your comparison where you may a hog nose or something like that. Those are very different snakes. And, anyone who, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but like generalizing colubrids is a pretty ridiculous thing to do.
That's dumb.
Generalizing thousands upon thousands of species of snakes. So,
very cool. Yeah. Okay.
Very good point.
So with breeding, I know you've only produced the one clutch, but you still produced a clutch.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about what you did to get that clutch? Did you do any kind of, because these are neotropical snakes, so some people cycle, some people don't. Some people just
you cohab.
You keep your stuff as in pairs. So just kind of talk through that process.
Yeah. So I mean, right now I'm just kind of chalking that one up to luck and having healthy animals. Because they bred completely off season. I got my clutch in like late October. I mean, totally uncharacteristic to the species. But yeah, I got their big displays ready to go by like May of last year, and then by the fall I saw some courtship with my Veracruz pair that I got the clutch from. I'm like, why? I'm like, I was almost starting to like slow them down for my first real attempt at like a quasi brumation for my spilotes, which I did. I can talk about that in a second. But then I was like, okay, whatever. I guess that's cool. At least I'm getting courtship out of them. Nice. Because like last year after the move, I had them in some like tub setups temporarily that I hated. And they ate and did fine, but I was just like, this is not how these snakes should live. I got 3 slug outs from my spilotes. So, which I'm like, this is better than I've ever done before. So I guess I'm somewhat heading in the right direction. So I'm like, I'm gonna get these guys in their cages and really do this right. So where next year they're ready to go as best they can. So again, to bring myself back onto track, just see this courtship behavior. I think I increased the food on the female a little bit, or like if I was feeding her a lot of chicks, gave her more rats, put a little extra weight on her. And then I saw a couple really solid copulations to where, I'm now like, oh, this is what a spilotes copulation looks like. Cool. I've never seen that before. Like they just, they do the kind of like the rattlesnakes, their tails just kind of touch and they drag each other all over the place. I'm like, all right, now I know that. And just, she just went through the motion. She went off food, went into shed. It was like, oh, all right, I guess this is happening. Cool. And, she got close, pulled the male, and she laid a beautiful clutch, set him up in the incubator and just forgot about him until, about 71 days later. And there they were. So I think all I really did was get him to a good body condition and put them together and let them do the rest.
Didn't do anything with like changing misting cycle or anything like that?
Not at that point, because I thought they were off season. I was just kind of caring for them like normal, just kind of letting them do their thing until like late fall. And I'm like, I'm going to start kind of doing my little brumation cycle that I'm planning on doing with them. So no, I honestly, at that point, really nothing. The only change was that they were now in these cages, which might be enough of a change, but it took them 4 months before they bred of being in those cages. So it wasn't like immediately, ooh, new stimulus. Yeah. Now I'm developing follicles. But then what I ended up doing with them was doing a kind of a mini cool down, not like a full brumation, put them down in the 50s, but they're in like what would be my dining room in my house. So I just kind of essentially cut the heat down there entirely. My girlfriend has some indigos right next to it, so I'm like, they'll do great with this kind of cool down too. So we can treat them the same way. All the animals in the area were going to be able to tolerate it. So at night they probably got into like the mid 60s, probably back in like the low 70s during the day. Didn't feed them, dried them out a bit, and then messed with the light cycle a lot. So like by kind of like incrementally turned it down to where they were getting like 6 hours of light at the lowest, and then started ramping it back up, reintroduced food, and got some action almost immediately upon that cycle being complete. It was probably like 10 weeks, so it wasn't very long at all. Nothing like even a typical colubrid brumation period. But like didn't see any sort of weight loss, which is really significant considering these are really high energy, low body fat colubrids. Friend of mine, Zac Loughman from Palm Beach Colubrids, told me about how he cycled his. He has Veracruz locality Mexicanus as well that he's produced. I'm like, I'll do whatever you say you did because it obviously worked for you. So, you know, I mean, he's in Florida. I'm in the desert, so there's going to be some differences just from a climate standpoint. But as far as the general parameters of it goes, I'm like, what's the harm in trying this? So, you know, and I guess now I'll find out if it did work. But I'm confident that things are going to go well this year. I don't want to jinx anything. What was actually kind of crazy though is that it turned out that same female, the Veracruz Mexicanus, she cycled again in brumation and slugged out like a few weeks out of brumation. I'm like, she had these little tiny slugs that were like the size of follicles. I'm like, it's kind of crazy.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm like, hopefully this year you can kind of bring yourself back to a little bit of normalcy, but that was interesting. So
I want to go back real quick to something you mentioned. Just for those that are listening that maybe haven't kept spheloides and thinking about it, or even if you're not familiar with even what they look like. So that's one thing that I still kind of wrestle with. Max has just put up some pictures. If you know, if you're on YouTube, there those are. If you're listening and you hop on YouTube, at this point you'll see it. But never have messed with you know, I hadn't kept those before. Now have a pair. Zach had sent me some, picked up another.
Nice.
And when you're used to North American colubrids, even Asians may be smaller for the most part than North Americans, some anyway.
Yeah.
But the body structure, because it's like if I had a black rat snake that looked like a Spheloides build, something's not right with this black rat snake. You know what I mean? This is underfed. This thing is dying, pumping. Right. And that exactly. It looks like it's sick. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're not used to this body style. So, you know, go into it knowing that you're going to have the urge to feed the hell out of this thing because it looks, skinny compared to what you think you're used to if you are used to more of a North American colubrid. Because again, even, you know, a lot of the Asian species, they still look more full than what this build.
Very vertically oriented snakes.
Yes.
Very triangular.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So just wanted to mention that to the listeners.
Definitely. Yeah. Their body structure differences are one of the things that I'm really fascinated by. I mean, they're pure muscle, you know, they're super light bodied too. And you know, when you're holding them, they'll wrap the entire back third of their body around you and every which way, lock themselves onto your arm or whatever it is. And that's how they feel comfortable. You know, until they get a tail anchor, that snake is not going to feel like it's in a good spot. But then to me, it's so cool. Like they get that anchor on you, they're sitting there, and then they start those slow tongue flicks.
Yep.
Those are so neat, you know?
It's so cool. I mean, they're so full of interesting behaviors. It's just why they're so much fun. And to me that, you know, and maybe others might have a different opinion on it, but to me that slow tongue flick is just pure curiosity. It's not defensive. It's not nervous. It's just like, what's going on here? And I feel like there are not very many snake behaviors out there that are done purely out of a sense of curiosity for their surroundings in that moment. Because I was, when I'm handling mine, they don't do that at first. If I'm pulling them out of their cage and they're a little flighty, they'll do that 5 minutes into the interaction. Once they've calmed down, they're sitting in my left hand, I'm working in their cage with my right hand, and I'll turn around and they're just slow tongue flick. Like, you're obviously, I mean, they're not trying to bite you. They're not trying to get away. It's like, to me though, the explanation is that's just confidence and curiosity in that moment. I think that's super cool.
What I think is so neat is typically, like any other snake that is flicking its tongue, you really don't even notice it. We don't even pay attention to that anymore. And it's almost like they're not even doing it. It's reflex.
Sure.
Right. It's like them breathing. It's just reflex how they're tasting the air. But that slow tongue flick is so deliberate. You know what I mean? They are intentionally doing that. And that's just really cool. Really cool to see. Because again, so much of many snakes' behaviors are more of just an instinct reaction, but whenever you see that it's a deliberate movement, motion, there's thought behind it, I guess. Very, very cool.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We didn't really go into this when you were talking about setup, but since we're talking about breeding and just anything that you do to change, do you put UV on your sporties?
I don't. No, I don't.
Okay. Just curious. That's something we ask everybody at this point with any species, because, it seems to be coming more and more in the conversation when it comes to colubrid keeping. So just curious, if you did that. But light cycles, I take it.
Yeah. I mean, they have LEDs in their enclosures. Yeah. I definitely have opinions on that debate. I think that, I don't know if you want to get into it or not, but I focus much more on prey quality than the lighting. If this lighting is supposed to help synthesize vitamins and minerals and whatnot, but you're feeding them this empty vessel of a rodent or a day-old chick that is just bones and yolk and feathers. What are they synthesizing? I feel like it's like you're trying to solve a problem when you're like, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a wide open gash. Like, okay, like what if you try to think of a good comparison with humans? I mean, it's like, you exercise, but you eat a terrible diet, drink heavily. Okay,
I feel attacked.
But yeah,
I exercise every day, man.
So,
but so yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not like a UV lighting denier, but I think it's solving an issue that we're not hitting the root cause of, which is prey quality.
I can see some value in that statement.
I was in the rodent industry for 5 years, and I know what those diets are. Those diets are garbage. And I breed my own rodents now, and I feed them a naturalistic diet. And there's a noticeable difference in the snakes, in their vitality, in their growth, in their coloration, everything about it. It's so different. And no special lighting, no anything. And obviously, I'm not talking lizards here. Obviously, there's a lot of lizards. If you don't give them UV lighting, you're going to be in for a bad time pretty quickly. But I know what these rodents and these birds are that we're feeding to our snakes, and they're Lay's chips. Like, that's what they are for the most part. And unless you have some level of control over what you're feeding to your animal. And it's like, like I take all my supplements, but I eat McDonald's 3 times a day. It's like, okay, cool. You're great. I hope you feel good about yourself. So, and, I'm not trying to like belittle anybody. I just think it's a perspective that isn't shared very often, especially because it's like a lot of the money interests in our industry wouldn't want that to be out there, because they want to sell their lights and they want to sell their Chinese rodents or their lab rodents, and they don't want anyone thinking about what they're actually doing. We've been doing this for decades, so it's got to be fine, right? It's like, yeah, it's fine, but look at dog food these days. I mean, the landscape of the dog food industry today compared to 20 years ago is night and day. I mean, people might judge you for walking into your house and seeing kibble for your dog these days, where 20 years ago, it's like, what are you feeding your dog? Vegetables? Okay, idiot. Like, they make this food for a reason. So just that hasn't hit rodent feeding animals yet.
I'll tell you, so my opinion is I think that both have some pretty strong relevance, both the lighting as well as the nutrition. And I think that there's, that we're still just scratching the surface, where it all is for both. But, and it's funny because I just told Zac this, was it last night? that at some point and Stephen, you may be somebody we want to bring on, because I think this would be a multi-guest episode. But I literally, and I want to thank PJ. The idea came from PJ Crone. I mean, he's the one who mentioned it to me. But we need to have an episode where we talk about kind of rodents at scale, or feeders at scale.
Yeah.
And what that looks like, the nutrition, all of that conversation, and there's another second piece that, Zac knows kind of what I'm talking about on that. We want to take a much more, a big deep dive, but I don't want to spend too much time on it now, because again, it's going to end up being its own episode. But I'm curious, when you said you feed your rodents a naturalistic diet, what does that look like?
It looks like a mixture of different, fruits and vegetables, like dehydrated vegetables and stuff like that. Like I get like a mixture that's kind of like, it's like a made for birds, but has a lot of really, has a lot of different seeds and stuff like that. Sunflower seeds, soldier fly larvae, oats to help with like lactation in the moms, carrots, blueberries, stuff like that. Just really diversifying the diet, giving them items that will be rich in different micronutrients that you won't find in, processed commercial diet, stuff like that. Hays and whatnot.
Curious.
Yeah. I think that the penultimate is to do the diet you're talking. I mean, it's basically gut loading a mouse.
Yeah.
Think about that, but that is essentially what it is. And when a lot of times, I think when people think about gut loading, they think about the fact that the loading of the gut, you think like for a cricket, the bearded dragon eats the bug and then it gets the stuff that's in the stomach. But in reality, there's an awful lot of biological pathways that go through the insect when you give it that higher quality diet.
Yeah.
That then increases its muscle nutrition. They don't really digest the chitin, but there's some collagens and things that are where those joints meet that they can get. But I do, this is a timely conversation because I have a student that we did our first like real light experiment with snakes. And what we did is we didn't even use UVB lights. We used the sun. So we bought these little rabbit hutches or tortoise hutches. I don't know what, there was some kind of hutch.
Okay.
Something where you can put your reptile in a like little, I think it was like a 4-foot by 18-inch by 10-inch box, and a third of it was essentially a built-in hide box, and then the other part was just open screen. And so we put those inside another cage, so we had what's called double containment. So if they got out, they weren't in the environment; they were just in another cage. And then we put those. We did blood draws. They were all Pitchophis. We did blood draws on northern pines, black pines, bull snakes. And at the beginning of the study, and then we put them out there, I think it was for 60 days. And then at the end of the study, we did a blood draw. Now, unfortunately, anybody that's tried to do a blood draw on a snake knows that sucks. You got to hit the caudal vein in the tail. And unless your vet does this all the time,
difficult process.
You just don't get it. So unfortunately, we had like some of them were pre and some of them were post, but only I think 2 of the 12-ish that we used, we got the pre and the post. Okay. And what was really interesting is that the vitamin D, which you get from exposure to sunlight and the whole pathway, it shot up in the bull snakes that were kept outside. And we're not like, this isn't novel. One of my collaborators, Dr. Bogan, at OCIC, he's kept indigo snakes outside in those badass enclosures, and he's seen vitamin D go up. There's been studies done with corn snakes where the vitamin D went up. There's the infamous study with ball pythons where it didn't, and then everybody in freaking herpetoculture latched onto that. I was like, they don't need it. They don't need it. See, but the fact that you get that rise as a scientist, I can't help but think something's going on. Yeah. I think the question we don't ask enough is, and you kind of alluded to this, is like, how biologically significant is that to maintain an animal in human care well?
Right.
That's something that's going on, and that's what we don't know with snakes. So that's the piece of this whole thing. Like, it's kind of everybody looks at it this way, straight on. Maybe look at it from the side and ask that question, because it could be that it's not significant. It could be that it's hyper significant. It could be something we're never going to know because we can't get the right metric to measure wellness in a snake. If that makes sense. Yeah. But the one thing we do know, like you said, is if you feed them crap, they're not going to be healthy, because you literally are what you eat.
Right.
This whole the lighting thing, I have fought this, man. I have tried not to go down this rabbit hole at the school. It's expensive. It's difficult. It's controversial. Finally had the right student ask me to do it, and now I'm obsessed with it. The last 2 years, people that listen know that I got completely obsessed with dirt. Just couldn't walk anywhere a hognose snake lived without. I did it on the Florida trip. People were off taking pictures of the snake. Here I am digging in the sand, trying to see if I can get to a different layer of soil. It was all the same. Really interesting. But I just feel it in my bones. I'm going down the pathway of light. I'm going to see the light.
I think in a way it's because that's where the hobby and the industry is right now. There continues to be advances. There continues to be the hot topics. We're on lighting now. And before that, it started going bioactive. That was kind of a craze. But now that bioactive has gotten, bigger and bigger, lighting is a natural piece of that. And so as, the lighting is needing to be better understood for the bioactive setups, then it starts getting into, okay, the species we never thought about the UV and whatnot for, we start going that. So, but, to Stephen, to his point on the feed, I think that's probably going to be, well, I mean, it's kind of it's almost obvious, right? The better the food, the better it's going to be for the animal. We see that in us, but it's not I think right now the conversation, I'm going to make kind of a weird comparison. So lighting before, when being talked about, when they said, okay, stop doing the red lights, right? Yeah. It does this. That was about where we're at with food right now. Meaning, because when we talk about food, we don't talk about what the food eats. We talk about varying the diet. So we're not feeding just one prey, which, giving I think we all will probably agree that giving a variety of diet is a good thing, because that's what they're doing at, most species anyway, are having some variety out in, in the field. But I think that's where we are in that particular discussion as a hobby right now. Is right now we're talking about, instead of just feeding rodents, feed this, and this. And then eventually it'll start shifting to where now we don't give a damn about the red lights anymore. We're further advanced. We're talking about UV and what percentage of UV and the different types of UV and, all that, where then I think the food will eventually get to, okay, now let's talk about what the food is eating, and breaking it down even further. So I think it's just going to be part of the natural progression as the hobby continues to advance, and we continue to look at better and better ways of taking care of, I hate to say this, fewer animals, because the only way to really do this is for it to not be at such a large scale. Sure. So, just my 2 cents on that.
The flip side to the UVB argument, though, which I do want to say and put out there, is you can give them too much. We don't.
That's with any of them.
And I think but I hate putting this out there, because when you say you can give them too much, a lot of people grab onto that the same way they grabbed onto the ball python paper and go, see, you can hurt them more with it. You don't need it. In Zoosci, we are in the interesting situation of teaching people who have never done this before how to do this. And we've got a lot of lights at the university. And early on, we made a mistake, and we had somebody grab high output UVB bulbs, and we told them go get a heat lamp. They grabbed the UVB bulb They put it in one of our Barron's Racers enclosures that was burned out. The same student took another one of those bulbs, put it in with one of our black milk snakes, and these things were getting high output UVB 12 hours a day, and it absolutely 100% unequivocally blinded them. They've got blinded eyes, So this whole idea that they've got to give them UVB, you got to understand UVB before you give it to anything. And I get a little bit upset with the lighting side that will sometimes vilify people for not using it. Stop it.
Well,
teach them how to do it, then let them do it. But don't say you got to do UVB. There's got to be UVB. If you don't understand what you're doing, you're actually putting your animal in harm's way.
Yeah. So
that's the flip side. So we've given all sides of the argument now.
and then the other side, oftentimes the people who are shouting that the loudest are the ones selling the UVB bulbs.
That's fair.
I've kept snakes with UV, without UV, and for me, with the species I've kept, the only thing I've seen different is that some of the snakes that with UV ended up with UV burns. No difference. But I see that as my fault of not doing that properly. But I also didn't see any sort of significant change in anything, behavior, feeding, breeding, no change whatsoever. And again, I might be fully on me. But the way that I look at it, when in the wild will any snake ever be in a circumstance where they're going to experience UV lighting for 12 hours a day and they can't get away from it? Never.
And that's a good point.
If I were to use UV on my snakes, I would probably have, when I was using it with my rattlesnakes, I had the lights come on at 8 o'clock. The UV didn't come on until 10, and it was on until 3. I'd probably even go less than that. Let the lights come on, let the snakes start to get active, let their basking spot heat up, get those natural behaviors rolling, and then the time of the day when they would be out in the UV lighting during those early hours when they're basking, have it present, turn it off. But if you're selling a UV light and your customer is only going to run that light 2 to 3 hours a day, that light's going to last a whole heck of a lot longer than if that light is on 12 hours a day, and you can sell many fewer of those lights. But they're not going to say that. That might be best for the animal, though. That might be the most practical. And I know one of the things on the screen might not like that I'm saying this. But it's just no one's saying that.
No, I get it. So I'm going to play devil's advocate with you on this.
Please.
And this isn't an argument, but it's.
No, hold on one second.
Hold on. This isn't even about UV.
But let me
say I could be wrong too.
We're having a discussion. Correct.
Correct.
We're not yelling at each other.
100%. 100%.
That's not done in herpetoculture often.
Crazy, right? It's almost like things get done this way.
Right. So by that same thought, there's currently no data, no research that I'm aware of, and please, if somebody has it, correct me, but nothing showing us that the rodents from China are of any poorer quality than the rodents produced right here in the US. But those that tend to scream the loudest about it being a problem are the breeders here in the US that are having to compete with the Chinese frozen rodents.
And they're selling them too, and they're lying to you.
So and again, that's going to, we have more kind of later down the road that CCR is going to be working with that. We don't have an opinion on it for those that, basically all we're saying is when it comes to whether the rodents are, produced in China or here, there's just no data that says there's really any nutritional difference or it's just, honestly, it's kind of a scare tactic out there.
I would, from a purely from the mechanism of how the rodents are produced in China to how they're produced here, I trust the ones from China more, because by some of the ways that China works that we don't agree with, they're able to be much more strict about their protocols and much more measured in how they're doing things. And they can pay a lot more employees to do a lot more work than anyone here is going to do. The problem is when, and I know we don't want to talk about this a lot, but they get here, they're good. They go through radiation. They're sitting out for hours on end. The outside layers of those boxes are thawing. They go to distributor 1 into their freezer. They get broken down, shipped to distributor 2, broken down, shipped to distributor 3. By the time that thing's being fed off, it may have been frozen for 8 months and thawed 3 or 4 times.
Maybe
worst case scenario.
Right.
Like, it all
exactly.
Perfectly fine. It's not China that's the problem. It's every step it goes through in the U.S. that's the problem.
But then we could say the same thing about human food. That's
Absolutely.
been sent here from China. So there's that, and that's what we're getting at. It's just a lot of arguments, a lot of, and it's something that we've talked about and that we're kind of debating. And I only brought it up because of the UV statement. I'm like, and another hot topic out there right now, we actually just kind of mentioned. And so,
and that's part of why I'm so passionate about telling people to breed their own rodents. Like, and kind of to go back to the topic earlier of like, is this gut loading a rodent? To me, it's like, I want to breed the healthiest mice in African soft furs just for that, because my mice can breed with good health twice as long as a conventionally raised mouse. They are larger and leaner as adults. My retired breeder jumbos, I feel completely comfortable feeding that to any snake and it being a healthy meal, but they're right in front of me. And then also I can feed fresh killed to where I'm not putting it through a freezing process, especially not a deep freezing process and dry ice, and killing all the micronutrients that exist in that animal's gut. And to me, if you're approaching the health of your animal, I think that's 10 times more important than lighting for snake. But that's also not with data to back it up, more just some experience and like just some critical thought about it that could be totally wrong.
It just sounds like I need to be doing a lot more research at the school.
Yeah, I'm telling this has been a great conversation, and this is how these conversations need to go.
I badly want to partner up with some institution on doing like real research on reptile nutrition through the vessels that we use. Like, we know about how to nourish rodents and birds and stuff like that. Then how does that transfer over to our animals? I can wax poetic on here all day about what I think. I have no clue. These are just pure guesses. They're probably based in some level of reality, but absolutely no clinical data whatsoever to speak of, other than my snakes look better to me. That's not going to hold up. That's not going to pass peer review. That's nothing.
My snakes are pretty.
It's something to make people think, though, and I think if it does anything, if it does that, I'm happy. So.
Yeah. One more thing. I want to circle back to the UVB thing.
Yeah.
I will say, when I put UVB on the female false water cobras, now they are in very large PVC enclosures.
Yeah.
And I've had cameras on them in the past. I've noticed that I had 4 10-inch cut dome slots. And I just had a UVB up there, to be brutally honest, just because I thought, what the hell, I'll throw it up there. I know the distance to the animal and the amount of space, and the snake can get completely away from it. So it was more for my curiosity, just to see, like, will they use it? Will they not use it? And I did a thing where I would like move the lights around. It would usually take the female a day to figure out where the light went. So like if I moved it on Monday, she would bask where the UVB was in the morning. On Tuesday, then Wednesday, she's where the UVB was. But during the telegenesis and the the yolking up part, the post ovulation part, fertilization, whatever you want to call it, they absolutely sought it out. I can say that.
Sure.
I did it in an empirical way. I did multiple females. Now, the $1 million question is like, do they? Is that a psychological thing? But I've also thought, if they, I'm doing air quotes, like it, I don't know why I'm holding this bookmark. Does that, that's obviously a good thing. But then you think like, I like double cheeseburgers too. That's not, the best thing. But I don't know. I think the verdict's out. However, I have a tendency to lean a little bit more towards UVB doing something.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know what that something is. That's
Yeah.
what that's where I sit, because there's definitely for a lot of the species I keep anyway, I see a seeking out. Now, another thing, the ecologist in me looks at those snakes, and most of the false water cobras are diurnal, active, fossorial snakes.
Yes.
I don't think when we look at this argument enough, I think it's ridiculous to go into this and say they all need it. There's like 3,500 plus snake species on Earth. A lot of those are crepuscular. A lot of them are strictly nocturnal. Like, there's a lot of nuance to this that I don't think the blanket statements are where I have massive problems. So given the ecology of falsies, they're in an open environment, they're diurnal, they're day active, and they're oftentimes active during like the peak part of the day, which is pretty interesting.
That's really
I can see, given their natural history, this kind of direction towards light. Now, if you put like an alterna, I don't know what the hell an alterna is going to do. That's a crepuscular, highly nocturnal snake.
Right.
So, but that's also what makes it super interesting. It's like, what would they do? So anyway.
Well, and I think a good aspect of the UV discussion these days is some of the innovations being made in the bulbs themselves. Like the stuff that Exo-terra has been putting out recently, I think is the real cutting edge of what's going to be happening going forward. Mm-hmm. The low output spot bulbs that don't produce any heat. I mean, like when I was experimenting with UV, I was using the T5 UV lights. I'm like, it hurts my eyes to look at these. I can only imagine what it's like to be the snake in the cage, and they throw out a lot of heat, even a small bulb. So like I could throw off the entire thermal dynamic of my cage by having one of these in there. I was going into some of them and temp gunning them. I'm like, oh wow, the ambient temperature in this 4x2x2 with the 12-inch bulb is 95 degrees. Like, what would be better for the snake? This idea of this light, or being being at the right temperature. So I think with like the new products coming out, that'll definitely give a lot of chance for good experimentation to be done. And then I think for customers who are looking into it, make sure you're buying good stuff, because there are companies that are literally just flipping bulbs off of Alibaba that are not being tested. There's no research into the effectiveness of the bulbs, whether or not they even do what they say, whether or not they're going to harm your animal in the long run. And to me, at least right now, once there's real evidence from other people, I'm all on board. But until then, when the risk to me is still potentially outweighing the reward, I'd rather use whatever I'd spend on those bulbs to upgrade these animals elsewhere, whether that be larger enclosures or more thermostats, or put more money into how I do my rodents, stuff like that. So
cool.
Well, and I think that's, I mean, as long as we all are continuing to attempt to be better keepers,
absolutely,
in whatever direction we're going, then we are better keepers. By doing it. So
100%.
This is good.
Very cool.
Well, I think we need to end it with the question. I think Stephen's going to be a good one, for this question. So, Stephen, what we want to know is, with your experience in the hobby, and it sounds like you've had your hands in quite a bit, so quickly, really. Where do you see the hobby going? Where does the next 10 years look like? Good, bad, no change? What?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I feel like that's like a question I have for a lot of people myself. So I think that the sentiment of a lot of people is moving towards welfare on an individual basis compared to, their collection and how it reflects on themselves. Like, I think that in 10 years, the goal won't be, I want to have a collection of 500 snakes. It's like, I want to take care of these 15 snakes really, really well. And I think especially from like a business standpoint, with how expensive a lot of things are getting, from feeders to enclosures to life outside of reptiles, I think we're going to see more of a, more of a trend towards smaller collections set up very well, and people trying, like someone like Roy is a great example of, I think, like the kind of keeper of the future, where he has a very small collection. He's doing everything. He goes all out with everything he has, and he's highly successful with everything that he's working with. I see a push towards diversification of species in the hobby. I mean, Clint, what you were saying about Tinley of there being the most colubrids there you've probably ever seen. That's not an accident. The bust of 2020 was inevitably going to come with an equal and opposite reaction of the fall of the last year and a half, so to speak.
Course correction. Yeah.
And I feel like I'm in a interesting position to like kind of observe a lot of different aspects of this hobby without necessarily being involved. Seeing all of these people who got really heavy into ball pythons in 2020 and 2021, refocusing their collections onto stuff like green trees or different colubrids or stuff like that, monitor lizards. It worries me because I'm like, okay, are these just the kind of people that are going to always be doing this ebb and flow, push and pull, get a collection, sell a collection, which inevitably that will happen in this industry forever. It's the human nature. But hopefully just a mindset shift towards prioritizing the animals over ourselves, and then or whatever we want this to be for ourselves. And I think it ultimately will end with better profits for people as well, because what we have seen, and there've been some pretty interesting case studies in the last few years of people who had a super successful basement-sized breeding business, taking it to professional scale and crashing and burning as fast as they got there, or not as fast. They got like much faster than they got there.
Right.
So that, unless you're mass producing and exporting most of what you're doing, it's not going to happen anymore. And especially if you're trying to enter a space that has been taken up by somebody or a group of people for 20, 30, 40 years. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you must be the most passionate ball python breeder in the world, I guess. If you want to be doing 400 clutches a year, okay. Mike Wilbanks exists. Eugene Bissett exists. They've been doing this for longer than you've been an idea. So, but I don't discourage ball pythons, but I always encourage people to keep their interests, keep their eyes open, treat this as a hobby. And if you can make a business model out of it, great. I mean, I feel like people have a hard time like digesting that for me, because I'm 24 years old, but like, as we've talked about, this is my idea when I was 9 years old. I just happened to have found it really early. Like, it took me 13, 14 years to be able to do this full time. That just happened to be slotted much earlier in my life than most people do it. But if I had found it when I was in high school, I wouldn't be close to being able to be doing this at a full-time level. So, patience is important with that. I guess to get back to the actual question, because I have been rambling a little bit. I hope we continue to see a growth as far as people getting into the hobby. I feel like I don't really have my finger on the pulse of how exactly that goes. It's just a truth that after Brian Barczyk passed away, we saw a dramatic decrease in new keepers. I think that had a good bit to do with the stagnation of growth in the industry, was that our loudest voice was no longer there. So, and there's plenty of people who have large internet followings and get people involved. So I'm not talking down on any of them. Like, people like Snake Discovery or Adam Wicken.
Yeah, they're doing great. Yeah,
they're doing phenomenal work, but they wouldn't be there if Brian wasn't doing what he was doing, and he wouldn't have been there if Steve Irwin didn't do it. You can always reference it to the person who did it before. That's the one area that I don't really have my finger on the pulse of new keepers, how frequently people are coming into the hobby. It is, though, encouraging to know that a lot of the big box chains are really investing into reptiles and doing their own product lines. And Chewy is going crazy with their reptile expansion. I've heard talks of Amazon doing stuff with reptiles. So like, I feel like that is the data point to look at as far as growth in the hobby, is these multi-billion-dollar corporations taking an interest in it, because they wouldn't do that if there wasn't a financial interest for them there, for better or worse, for in the grand scheme of things. So I guess that is, seems positive to me. The fact that so far this year, I've seen, and people I've talked to have seen, a significant increase in the industry compared to last year, when the economy is no better for any of us. Like we're not just following the trend of the economy. Somehow this is doing this on its own. I think a lot of that had to do with just general fear around the election. And now that we're no longer in that mindset, people are kind of going back to normal. That's another topic, but I think, normalcy coming back a little bit. I can't even say that because it really hasn't either, but
it's been anything but a normal first couple months here.
It's pretty chaotic. I'm not going to lie, but all right, get back on track. So, all right, the things I'll actually say to answer this question, I think, leaning towards more diversity, individualized care for the animal being prioritized, and I think the predominant business model being like a small scale, high profit margin, bedroom basement style breeder being the scale that most people are aspiring to, knowing that if you get too far above that, you're going to absolutely destroy your profits immediately, unless you're doing something like you are, Clint, where you have retail stores and you're doing dry goods, or if you're doing feeders. But if you're trying just to make this about your animals, I think that there's going to be, the dream of having the large facility will not be the dream of having the bedroom, the basement of your dreams, and having these amazing enclosures for your super healthy peak level animals.
I like it.
Well said, dude.
Hopefully that made sense. Didn't make a lot of sense.
It did. Yeah.
All right. So this was great. We'll absolutely have you back on.
Yeah. I can already think of like 2 episodes I'd like to have you back.
I love the last hour of this. That was kind of what I envisioned the podcast being. So good job, Steve.
Oh, hell yeah.
With that being said, where can people find you if they're interested in your animals?
Yeah. So from a social media standpoint, I'm on Instagram at Scrub Shepherd, just Stephen Kush. Facebook, I have a YouTube channel as well. It's just under Stephen Kush, or at Kush Reptile on YouTube. Do a semi-vlog style video every week, just kind of put on information about the animals that I work with. I have a morph market as well, Kush Reptile. You can check that out. And then I have a podcast of my own.
You do.
It's called Kush's Corners on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, live every Wednesday night. And I have 2 guys I probably need to have on as guests in the future. And actually, I've actually talked to my buddy who co-hosts with me sometimes. We've already talked about trying to reach out to you guys as well. But
we'll come on.
We'd love to come on. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
it's always cool when you have us on individually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I've done that before with some like with Roy and Phil. I did individual podcasts with them. I'm like, and even I feel like for me, people probably if you listen to my show, hearing me as a guest, it's an entirely different experience. Yeah. And I feel like I don't want to water down somebody by muddying up a podcast with a lot of people. But there's a time and a place for that too, for like a group discussion. But I like getting really in depth on conversation, like what we did tonight about the lighting and nutrition stuff. That's what excites me. You can talk about husbandry and breeding and stuff all day, and that's great. But you can get a lot of that on the internet. You can't get quite as many conversations like what we just had, and that's stuff like that really excites me. And putting the egos aside and just thinking about what's best for our animals, what's the information we have at our disposal, and how can we communicate that to people, and then kind of get the gears turning with as many people as possible, because maybe there's someone who listened to this episode who's going to have the breakthrough idea on how to merge the worlds of nutrition and lighting to maximally benefit all of our animals in captivity. And if we didn't have the conversation, that person didn't run into it, that connection would have been made. So I don't know, to me, that's what it's all about.
Yep. Hot damn, man. All right. Well, it was wonderful having you on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We would absolutely love to have you back. So
by all means.
With that being said, Clint, where can they find you?
You can find me, Clint Bartley, on Facebook, or follow us, Metazotics on Facebook, MetazoticsLLC on Instagram. Please check us out, Metazotics.com. That's where you can see every animal that we have for sale, individually photographed and ID numbered for your viewing pleasure, as long as, of course, all supplies that you may need.
All righty. You can find me at Zac Loughman on Facebook, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram. And if you're listening to this and you're in high school and you want to go to college where there's a metric crap load of reptiles, I think I can make this statement and it be true. And if you know otherwise, like we say all the time, let me know. But I'm teaching biology of snakes this semester. So it is a class, it's not herpetology, it's just snakes. And I don't know if that class is being taught in any of the other 1,000+ universities in the United States of America or elsewhere. So you want to take courses like that, herpetology, just came back from a snaking trip in Florida, consider West Liberty University, please, for your undergrad. And graduate students, as always, I'm always willing to hear you out. I'm giving a tour to a listener on Thursday. So that's pretty cool. For graduate school. So you want to do the herpetology thing. I'm going all in. That's what's happening. I've been fighting going all in, but I, like Clint, like we have a tendency to just throw ourselves off of hypothetical cliffs and we enjoy the velocity of a fast death, but we somehow figure out how to stick the landing every freaking time. So anyway, we're doing that again. So herpetology labs a go. All righty. So be it morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Hope you have a good one. Goodbye.